Growing up in Iowa, I received far more education about dirt than seemed necessary. We learned about the less hills, fertile prairie topsoils, and the flat grasslands that owe their levelness to glacial erosion. We memorized rocks and were tested on their identification. We took school field trips to prairies. I also took a geology course when I was studying abroad in college, but the class was in French, so I can't say I retained anything particularly useful. That said, and whether you've ever studied the topic or not, today's gospel reading makes pretty clear that God doesn't care about soil quality. In the first of a series of parables about seeds, Jesus tells a story about a sower who goes out to sow. You heard the details. The seeds go everywhere, on the path, on rocky ground, among thorns, and in fertile soil. But despite the detailed descriptions of the places that the seeds land, this story isn't about land. If it was, Jesus might have called it the parable of the diverse terrains. Instead, he calls it the parable of the sower. So if we focus on the sower, we see that this parable is about a person who indiscriminately scatters seeds absolutely everywhere. This parable is about a person who either doesn't know or doesn't care that not every seed will bring forth grain. This parable is about a person whose delight is in nature's wild and holy freedom, not in methodical agriculture, whose delight is in sowing, not in harvesting. We see this sentiment echoed throughout today's readings. From Isaiah, we hear of rain and snow that come down from heaven to water the earth. They make it bring forth and sprout, giving seed to the sower and bread to the eater. The psalmist also describes the extravagance and plenty that comes from God. You make the earth very plenteous. With heavy rain, you soften the ground and bless its increase. Your paths overflow with plenty. And in both Isaiah and the Psalm, this lavish abundance is associated with joy. This connection between bounty and joy, between extravagance and delight, echoes also in our own lives, doesn't it? When our cup runneth over, we are elated and grateful. When we want to really celebrate, we throw a party with plenty of food and drink for all. And sometimes we know this connection by its opposite. In times of want, we feel stress. When resources feel scarce, we experience anxiety. I wonder if the parable of the sower, rather than causing stress in us over what kind of terrain we are cultivating or what our yield ought to be, might instead be an invitation to join the sower in the delightful act of sowing. To join the sower in trusting the abundance of the seeds and abiding in the joy of God's generosity. Author and poet Ross Gay spent an entire year practicing the spiritual discipline of abiding in delight. One day in July, Gay felt delighted and compelled to do something with that feeling, so he decided to write a daily essay about something delightful. His rules were simple. He would write about a delight every day for a year. He would begin and end on his birthday. He would draft these essays quickly, and he would write them by hand. Gay notes that it didn't take him long to learn that the discipline of writing these essays occasioned a kind of delight radar. Or maybe it was more like the development of a delight muscle. Something that implies that the more you study delight, the more delight there is to study. He felt his life to be more full of delight for having noticed it, and that his delight grew when he shared it. Hear that echo of abundance? He called his book The Book of Delights, and in it are 102 of his essays. One of my favorites is called Tomato on Board, and it starts, "What you don't know until you carry a tomato seedling through the airport and onto a plane is that carrying a tomato seedling through the airport and onto a plane will make people smile at you almost like you're carrying a baby, a quiet baby." I did not know this until today, carrying my little tomato, which my friend Michael gave to me, smirking about how I was going to get it home. Gay goes on to describe sweet interactions with airport security and other workers. And once Gay was on board with the tomato, the flight attendant directed him to an open seat in an exit row, saying, "Why don't you guys go sit there and stretch out?" Other essays are about the purple stains on his hands after picking mulberries from a tree on the side of the road, watching strangers feed birds in a park, a friend's unabashed use of air quotes, and his hilarious misreading of a church's outdoor sign as an advertisement for a jam sale rather than a warning against temptation. What is clear in this writing is that there is more delight in Gay's life than he could possibly notice or account for. And not because his life is special or his own soil particularly good, but because the world is so full of delightful things. This world, of course, is also full of sorrow and grief and trouble. But it is more full of delight than any of us could possibly notice or imagine. We live under the care of an exceptionally extravagant sower who seems to prefer the word more to the word enough. This same sower continues to sow, regardless of whether we notice every seed, because every morsel of delight is worth scattering, even if we don't fully appreciate it. So let's pause for a moment to notice a seed. Where has delight entered your life in recent days? What has God's joy scattered in your path? I invite you to think of one example, one specific moment of delight that you'd be willing to share with others. And this is where that mysterious piece of paper comes in. If anyone does not have a piece of paper in their bulletin, please raise your hand and one of our ushers can make sure that you have one. I've also been assured, thanks to Redmond, that every pew has writing utensils. So I'll give you a moment to acquire all of those things, and then I'll give you some more instruction. Does anybody need paper? Small piece of paper? Does everyone have a writing utensil? I'm going to assume that means yes. Okay. So I'm going to start by telling you that I will be including some of these in next week's e-news so that we can continue sharing in the abundant joy of God in our lives. And I'll be sure to leave out any names or identifying details so they can remain anonymous. But if there's something that you are unwilling to share with others, maybe save that one for yourself and pick something that you wouldn't mind if others knew about. All right, so once you have your paper and pen, I'm going to give you a minute to write down a delight and ask you to try to be specific. So if you're thinking of a person in your life, think of something that they have said or done recently rather than just the person. And if there's a beautiful moment you shared, you could write about that, or a food that you ate, or an animal that you saw, or something about the way the sun danced against your wall, but something specific and concrete, all right? So I'll give you a minute to write your delights. Beautiful. A sower went out to sow. The seeds fell absolutely everywhere. Some fell on rocky ground, some got lost, some went unnoticed, and some landed in a basket. These fistfuls of joy depend not on the quality of the terrain on which they land, but on the lavish generosity of the sower. The sower trusts that what needs to bloom will bloom, and it will be more than enough. Let anyone with ears listen and delight.